Bacon's Rebellion by Connie, Arlo, and Ben. Prior to Bacon's Rebellion, indentured servitude was the major labor system in the American colonies. People who couldn't afford passage from Britain to the New World signed a labor contract with a rich landowner that paid for the passage. They agreed to work for usually around 7 years on this land, and then they would be set free. As you can see, this indenture, shown on the right, was for 3 years. As demand for tobacco increased, the need for more land to grow that tobacco on increased as well, and the British colonists had a bad habit of taking it from the natives. This obviously made the natives mad, which led to an increase in tension between the two groups. The increasing encroachment on their land, and the violence that came with it, led the natives to violently retaliate and raid colonial farms. This made the British settlers mad, so like kids, they complained to their parents, in this case, their governor, William Berkeley. They wanted him to send British troops to the Chesapeake region to keep them safe, but Governor Berkeley refused. When Governor Berkeley refused, one indentured servant took matters into his own hands. His name was Nathaniel Bacon. He led angry poor farmers and indentured servants to attack the Indians, and then turn their rage onto the plantations owned by Berkeley. They burned several of Berkeley's plantations before the rebellion was eventually snuffed out, the resulting consequences being that the plantation owners had a newfound fear and respect regarding indentured servants. Also, the plantation owners did not want to use indentured servants anymore as a primary source of labor force. But they still didn't want to pay their labor force, so obviously they turned to slavery.
Immediately after Bacon's rebellion, the remaining rebels were hung and all of the land involved was seized. The wealthy planters, who now had full control over the area, feared increased royal control because of the chaos and cut taxes and pushed frontier boundaries for land in the hope of creating a more stable society and staving off royal intervention. This continued expansion caused more conflict with indigenous people in the area, pushing them westward. With better economic conditions in England, the number of people migrating as indentured servants dropped, and the planters instead invested in African slaves as a source of labor. Slavery was codified into law, and the number of enslaved persons increased from 300 in 1650 to 13,000 in 1700. Bacon's rebellion also marks an important turning point in the colonial view of African people. Some distinctions had been made before between Africans and Europeans, but legally and otherwise, most colonists were viewed as the same. Africans were in the landowning class to an extent, some with servants and connections to the church, and indentured servants, no matter their race, were treated horribly. After Bacon's rebellion, the planter class consolidated, and planters realized they hadn't been able to control their servants and slaves, and increasingly began using dehumanizing rhetoric to justify their treatment of black slaves and to distinguish between people of African descent and people of European descent. Laws were enacted which said that African people were hereditary slaves, and this led to the Virginia slave codes and generally created widespread legalized slavery.
Who was Nathaniel Bacon? Nathaniel Bacon was born into wealth and graduated from the prestigious Cambridge University. However, after marrying the daughter of Sir Edward, Duke of Suffolk, greatly angering the Duke, Bacon decided to move to America to avoid incurring the wrath of his new father-in-law. With help from his parents, Bacon bought several plantations along the James River. Also, he was the nephew of the famous philosopher Francis Bacon, so that's a fun fact. Who was Governor Berkeley? William Berkeley was a veteran of the English Civil War and an experienced frontier Indian fighter. He initially offered Bacon land and even a seat on the city council. However, William and Nathaniel's conflicting views on the Native Americans eventually led to Bacon rebelling. While Berkeley was very lax with his policies towards the natives and wished to trade with them, Bacon saw them as inherent enemies to American colonization and wished for them to be completely eradicated.